In Phoenix, Arizona, a 62-year-old retired event planner was about to face the most hurtful betrayal of her life. What started as excitement for her favorite niece's wedding turned into a shocking display of ageism when her own sister cited her as too old and outdated for the guest list. Eleanor Maxwell wasn't your typical excluded relative. For 30 years she had bankrolled family events, loaned money that was never returned, and paid for countless graduations. When she received that dismissive text message, she had no idea her response would lead to the most expensive lesson in respect her family would ever receive. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The crisp October air carried the scent of desert sage as Eleanor Maxwell stepped onto her patio, coffee in hand. At 62, she had embraced her silver hair and laugh lines as badges of a life well lived. 30 years of running Maxwell Events had given her an eye for detail and a talent for making people feel special. Too bad her own family didn't see her the same way. Her phone pinged with a message from her younger sister, Marianne. Eleanor smiled, expecting an update about her niece Jessica's upcoming wedding. She had been helping with suggestions for months, even though Marianne had politely declined her professional assistance. "We want you to enjoy it as family," she had said. Eleanor had accepted this with grace, though she knew her expertise could have saved them thousands. The message made her coffee turn bitter in her mouth. "Eleanor, slight change of plans. We're going with a more modern aesthetic for Jessica's wedding. The planner suggested we focus on a younger crowd for the photos and overall vibe. Hope you understand if we keep the guest list to a more contemporary group. We'll send pictures. Love. You." Eleanor read the message 3 times, her hand trembling slightly. Was her sister actually uninviting her from her own niece's wedding? For being too old? After 30 years of being the family's financial safety net and emotional support system? She set her phone down carefully, as if it might shatter like her heart. Through her living room window, she could see the framed photo of Jessica's graduation, the graduation she had paid for when Marianne and her husband claimed they were a little short this month. Next to it stood a picture from her nephew Michael's wedding, where she had quietly covered the cost of the open bar when the budget ran tight. For 3 decades, Eleanor had been the backbone of family celebrations. When their parents passed away, she was the one who had organized and paid for both funerals, giving them the dignified send-offs they deserved while Marianne claimed she couldn't contribute due to cash flow issues. Eleanor had never asked for repayment, viewing her financial support as an expression of love rather than loans to be tracked. She picked up her phone again, reading Marianne's message one more time. The dismissal stung not just because of the exclusion, but because it exposed the truth Eleanor had been avoiding for years. Her generosity had never translated into respect or genuine inclusion. She was the family ATM, not a valued member. Eleanor's doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw her closest friend, Grace Chen, holding a bag from their favorite bakery. Grace had been her right hand at Maxwell Events before they both retired, and now she was Eleanor's most trusted confidant. "I brought cinnamon rolls," Grace announced as Eleanor opened the door. "I figured we could discuss the wedding plans over breakfast." Her smile faded as she took in Eleanor's expression. "What happened?" Eleanor handed her the phone with Marianne's message still displayed. Grace read it, her eyes widening in disbelief. "They're uninviting you because you're too old? After everything you've done for them? That's beyond cruel, Eleanor." "Apparently I'd ruined the modern aesthetic," Eleanor replied, attempting to keep her voice light despite the heaviness in her chest. "I guess my silver hair doesn't photograph well with their Instagram filter." Grace set the bakery bag on the kitchen counter and took Eleanor's hands in hers. "This isn't right. You've been their safety net for decades. How much have you given them over the years?" Eleanor shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. She had never kept track, considering it family support rather than financial transactions. "It doesn't matter. It was a gift, not an investment." "It matters when they treat you like this," Grace insisted. "Let's actually calculate it. You've helped with college tuitions, down payments, emergency car repairs, medical bills." As they sat at Eleanor's dining table with coffee and cinnamon rolls growing cold, they began listing the financial support she had provided over the years. Grace insisted on creating a spreadsheet, methodically entering each contribution Eleanor could remember. College tuition for Jessica and her cousin Michael. The down payment for Marianne's house when she divorced her first husband. Emergency medical bills when her brother-in-law had that skiing accident. "Don't forget Jessica's study abroad program in Italy," Eleanor reminded her. "That was $15,000. "And the time you paid off Marianne's credit card debt," Grace added, typing furiously. "That was what, $22,000? The numbers grew steadily, climbing past 6 figures, then approaching $250,000. Eleanor felt slightly nauseated seeing it all laid out so clinically. She had never viewed her support in terms of dollars and cents, these were acts of love for family members she cared about deeply. $247,850, Grace announced finally, turning the laptop screen toward Eleanor. That's what we can document. I'm sure there's more we've forgotten. Eleanor stared at the figure, a strange numbness spreading through her. Nearly $250,000 over 30 years, given freely to family members who now considered her too old and outdated to attend her niece's wedding. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What are you going to do? Grace asked gently. Eleanor's thoughts drifted to her storage room, where dozens of boxes contained the meticulous records she had kept from her event planning business. Eleanor Maxwell hadn't built a successful company by being disorganized. She had documentation. For everything, including receipts, bank transfers, and even handwritten thank you notes from family members acknowledging her financial gifts. I think, Eleanor said slowly, a new resolve strengthening her voice, it's time for a family accounting. What do you mean? Grace asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. If I'm too old to be included in family celebrations, then perhaps I'm too old to be their financial backup plan, Eleanor replied. She stood up, suddenly energized. If they want to treat me like a business expense that's no longer necessary, then I'll treat my contributions like what they actually were, loans. Grace's eyes widened. Eleanor, are you saying you're going to ask for the money back? Not all of it, Eleanor clarified, walking to her office with Grace following behind. Just the expenses related to weddings and celebrations. If I'm not good enough to attend Jessica's wedding, then I shouldn't have paid for her graduation party or her cousin's wedding reception. She pulled out a leather-bound notebook from her desk drawer, the same kind she had used throughout her career to track event details. I'm going to create an itemized bill for every celebration-related expense I've covered. Since they're positioning this as a business decision, modern aesthetic and all, I'll respond in kind. Grace looked concerned. Are you sure about this? It might cause a permanent rift. Eleanor paused, her hand resting on the notebook. The rift is already there, Grace. They just hid it behind thank you cards and family photos until now. I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing it because it's time they understood that respect should be a two-way street. As Grace left that afternoon, Eleanor sat alone in her office, surrounded by financial records and family photos. The contrast was jarring, smiling faces at events she had made possible, juxtaposed with bank statements showing thousands of dollars transferred to support those same smiling people. Her phone had remained silent all day. No follow-up from Marianne, no message from Jessica expressing regret about the situation. The absence of communication spoke volumes about how little they valued her presence in their lives. Eleanor opened her leather notebook and began writing, her event planner's precision guiding her hand as she documented each celebration-related expense with dates, amounts, and recipients. The task was oddly therapeutic, transforming her hurt into purposeful action. By evening, she had compiled a comprehensive list of wedding and celebration expenses she had covered over the years. Jessica's graduation party, $8,750. Michael's wedding reception, $22,500. Marianne's anniversary celebration for her second marriage, $11,200. The list went on, totaling just over $95,000. Eleanor created a professional invoice on her computer, complete with payment terms and a personal note. As I am apparently too old to participate in family celebrations, I am assuming our previous arrangement was business rather than family. Please remit payment for these celebration-related expenses within 30 days. Senior discount already applied. Her finger hovered over the send button for several minutes. Was she really going to do this? Would it burn bridges that could never be rebuilt? But then she remembered Marianne's casual dismissal, the easy way her sister had excluded her after decades of generosity, and she pressed send. The response was immediate. Her phone rang less than 5 minutes later, Marianne's name flashing on the screen. Eleanor let it go to voicemail. Then came a series of text messages, each more frantic than the last. Eleanor, what is this? Some kind of joke? You can't be serious about this invoice. Call me immediately. We need to talk. This isn't fair. Those were gifts, not loans. Eleanor turned off her phone and poured herself a glass of wine. Fair? She wanted to talk about fair? Was it fair to exclude someone who had given so much from a celebration they had helped make possible? The following morning, Eleanor awoke to a pounding on her front door. Through the peephole, she saw Marianne, her face flushed with anger or exertion, perhaps both. Beside her stood Jessica, looking confused and upset. Eleanor took a deep breath and opened the door, maintaining the composed demeanor that had served her well through decades of dealing with difficult clients. What is the meaning of this? Marianne thrust a printed copy of the invoice at Eleanor. You can't possibly expect us to pay this. Hello to you too, Marianne. Jessica, Eleanor nodded to her niece, who at least had the grace to look embarrassed. Would you like to come in? They followed her into the living room, Marianne still clutching the invoice like a weapon. This is extortion. You gave us these gifts freely. You never said anything about repayment. Eleanor sat in her favorite armchair, gesturing for them to take the sofa. You're right. They were gifts, given with love to family members I expected to treat me with basic respect. This is about the wedding, isn't it? Jessica spoke up, her voice smaller than her mother's. Aunt Eleanor, the wedding planner suggested. I don't care what the wedding planner suggested, Eleanor interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. I care that your mother thought it was acceptable to uninvite me because I'm too old for your modern aesthetic. I care that after 30 years of supporting this family financially and emotionally, I'm dismissed as an inconvenience. That's not fair, Marianne protested, though with less conviction. We just wanted the wedding to have a certain look. And I wanted to be treated like a valued family member, not an ATM, Eleanor replied. Life is full of disappointments. We can't pay this, Marianne said, setting the invoice on the coffee table. You know we can't. I know no such thing, Eleanor responded. You just told me you're spending a small fortune on Jessica's wedding. Enough to hire a planner who thinks excluding family members based on age is appropriate. Jessica looked at the invoice, her eyes widening at the total. Aunt Eleanor, I had no idea you'd done so much for us. Mom never told me. Of course. She didn't, Eleanor said softly. It was easier to accept my help without acknowledging the extent of it. So this is your revenge? Marianne demanded. Financial blackmail because you're not invited to one event? Eleanor leaned forward, meeting her sister's gaze directly. This isn't revenge, Marianne. It's a lesson in consequences. For 30 years, I've supported this family without asking for anything in return except to be included and respected. You've shown me that was too much to ask. So now I'm asking for something else instead. What do you want? Jessica asked quietly, before her mother could respond. I want you both to understand what you've taken for granted, Eleanor replied. I want you to recognize that family isn't just a convenient resource to be used and discarded. And yes, I want you to acknowledge that excluding me from your wedding because of my age is cruel and superficial. Marianne stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. We don't have to listen to this. Come on, Jessica. But Jessica didn't move. She was looking at the invoice, running her finger down the itemized list. Mom, did Aunt Eleanor really pay for my entire study abroad program? And my graduation party? That's not the point, Marianne said dismissively. It is exactly the point, Eleanor countered. I've given freely because I loved you and wanted to help. And this is how you repay that love, by telling me I'm too old to be seen at your daughter's wedding. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, a family heirloom Eleanor had restored at considerable expense after inheriting it from their parents. Another contribution Marianne had conveniently forgotten. What if? Jessica began hesitantly, what if we want you at the wedding, Aunt Eleanor? Would you tear up the invoice? Jessica! Marianne exclaimed. The wedding planner already. I don't care what the wedding planner said, Jessica interrupted, showing a backbone Eleanor hadn't realized she possessed. This is my wedding, and I want my aunt there. The aunt who apparently made my education possible. Eleanor felt a small crack in the wall of hurt she'd built around her heart. This isn't about the money, Jessica. It never was. It's about respect. I know, Jessica said, standing up and moving to sit on the arm of Eleanor's chair. And I respect you. I'm sorry I didn't stand up to Mom and the wedding planner earlier. Please come to my wedding. It wouldn't be the same without you. Marianne looked between her daughter and sister, clearly calculating her options. Finally, she sighed dramatically. Fine. The invoice disappears, and you're invited to the wedding. But I still think this whole thing is manipulative. Eleanor almost laughed at the irony of Marianne accusing anyone else of manipulation. Instead, she addressed her niece. Thank you, Jessica. But I need you to understand something important. This invoice represents more than just money. It represents years of being taken for granted, of having my generosity exploited without appreciation. If I come to your wedding, I need to know it's because you genuinely want me there, not because you're afraid of financial consequences. Jessica took her aunt's hands in hers. I want you there. I've always wanted you there. I let Mom and the wedding planner make decisions I should have questioned. Eleanor studied her niece's face, looking for signs of insincerity. Finding none, she nodded slowly. Then I'd be honored to attend. As Marianne and Jessica prepared to leave, Eleanor called them back for one final word. The invoice is suspended, not cancelled. How you treat me going forward will determine whether it ever comes due. I won't be taken for granted anymore, by either of you. The threat, or promise, hung in the air as they left. Eleanor closed the door behind them and leaned against it, emotionally exhausted but strangely empowered. Her phone pinged with a message from Grace. How did it go? Eleanor smiled as she typed her response. Let's just say the family accounting has officially begun. Coming over for dinner? I think we have a lot to discuss. That evening, as she and Grace shared a bottle of wine and homemade pasta, Eleanor reflected on the day's confrontation. I'm not sure if I did the right thing, she admitted. Part of me feels like I stooped to their level by using money as leverage. You didn't stoop to their level, Grace assured her. You just finally spoke in a language they understand. Some people only recognize value when it comes with a price tag. Maybe, Eleanor conceded. But what happens now? Do I just go to the wedding and pretend everything is normal? Do I keep helping them financially when they need it? Grace refilled their wine glasses. That's entirely up to you. But whatever you decide, make sure it comes from a position of strength, not obligation. You've spent 30 years being the family supporter. Maybe it's time they learn to stand on their own. Eleanor nodded slowly, considering her friend's advice. The confrontation had changed something fundamental in how she viewed her relationship with her family. The hurt remained, but alongside it grew a new sense of clarity and purpose. I think, she said finally, it's time for everyone to understand that respect isn't optional in relationships that matter. And it's definitely time for me to stop enabling behavior that diminishes my worth. Grace raised her glass in a toast. To new boundaries and genuine connections. Eleanor clinked her glass against her friend's. And to never being too old. To demand the respect you deserve. As the evening shadows lengthened across her living room, Eleanor felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in navigating these shifting family dynamics, but for tonight, she was content in the knowledge that she had finally stood up for herself. The invoice might never be paid in dollars, but its true value had already been realized in the currency of respect, a currency far more precious than money could ever be. The silence followed Eleanor home like a shadow she couldn't shake. She moved through her front door with the careful steps of someone navigating unfamiliar territory, though every lamp in the house blazed against the October evening. The familiar scent of her signature perfume, Chanel No. 5, a luxury she had allowed herself after decades of prioritizing others' needs, lingered in the hallway, and it hit her with the force of a physical blow. 30 years of bankrolling, family celebrations, and she still expected gratitude that never materialized. The expectation was so strong that she paused, listening for a phone call that would never come, before reality crashed down again with its terrible weight. Her cream-colored blazer felt like armor she no longer needed. Heavy and confining. In the bedroom she decorated with careful attention to both comfort and style, Eleanor caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her silver hair was still perfectly arranged, her makeup unsmudged despite the day's emotional turbulence. She looked composed, dignified, everything a successful businesswoman should be, but her eyes told a different story, reflecting a hurt that went deeper than mere exclusion. The house seemed to echo with the absence of phone calls that should have come by now. Jessica should have called to personally apologize. Marianne should have sent a text that showed genuine remorse. Even her nephew Michael, who had benefited so generously from Eleanor's financial support, should have reached out after hearing about the situation. But her phone remained silent on the kitchen counter, as isolated as she felt. Eleanor moved through the rooms like a curator touring her own museum. In the living room, Jessica's graduation photo still stood prominently displayed, the gold frame catching the evening light. Next to it, Michael's wedding portrait, the wedding reception. She had secretly funded when the couple's budget fell short. On another wall hung a family portrait from 5 years ago, everyone smiling broadly, Eleanor slightly to the side as if already being edged out of the frame. A soft knock at the front door broke through her reverie. For a moment, hope fluttered in her chest. Perhaps Marianne had returned, this time with a genuine apology rather than defensive anger. But when she opened the door, she found Teresa Ramirez standing on the porch, holding a bottle of wine and wearing the expression of someone who'd witnessed an injustice. Don't even think about saying you're fine, Teresa said, pushing past Eleanor into the house with the familiarity of a 20-year friendship. Grace called me. I know everything, and I'm not leaving you alone to stew in it. Teresa had been Eleanor's first major client when she started Maxwell Events. The successful restaurant owner had taken a chance on Eleanor's fledgling business for her daughter's quinceañera, and that spectacular event had launched Eleanor's reputation in Phoenix. Now Teresa owned a chain of upscale Mexican restaurants across Arizona, and their friendship had deepened through years of mutual respect and support. She set the wine bottle on the kitchen counter and turned to study Eleanor with the keen eye of a woman who'd built her own empire from scratch. "They're actually going through with this? Excluding you from the wedding because you're too old?" It wasn't a question but an indignant confirmation. Eleanor sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the weight of the day finally overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. The wedding planner suggested a more contemporary crowd. "Apparently, my silver hair would clash with their Instagram filters." "Pendejos," Teresa muttered, then immediately softened her tone. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. After everything you've done for them, this is beyond ungrateful." The validation hit Eleanor like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. For hours she'd been questioning herself, wondering if her invoice had been too harsh, if she had overreacted to what might have been a thoughtless rather than malicious exclusion. But Teresa's outrage confirmed what she already knew: the situation was exactly as hurtful as it felt. "You know what really gets me?" Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. "Marianne had the audacity to act offended when I presented her with the invoice. These were gifts, not loans," she said. As if that somehow makes her behavior less appalling. Teresa poured 2 generous glasses of the Cabernet she'd brought, setting one in front of Eleanor. "Of course she's offended. You disrupted the comfortable arrangement where she takes and you give. People hate having their entitlement challenged." I know. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the wine glass, drawing comfort from its tangible presence. "Grace keeps telling me the same thing. But Marianne is still my sister. Jessica is still my niece. Part of me wonders if I've gone too far with this invoice business." "Gone too far?" Teresa's eyebrows shot up. "Eleanor Maxwell, you haven't gone far enough. For 30 years you've been this family's safety net, their emergency fund, their celebration sponsor. The one time you ask for basic respect, to be included in an event you probably would have ended up partially funding, they treat you like you're making unreasonable demands." The kitchen fell quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Eleanor found herself thinking about boundaries, how she had failed to establish them with her family, allowing financial generosity to substitute for the mutual respect that should have been the foundation of their relationships. "Marianne wasn't always like this," she said suddenly, staring into her wine glass as if it might contain the explanation for her sister's transformation. "When we were young, before our parents died, she was thoughtful, considerate. Something changed after her first divorce. It was like she decided the world owed her compensation for her suffering. And you became the primary source of that compensation," Teresa observed gently. "I wanted to help," Eleanor said, her voice small. She was struggling as a single mother. "I had a successful business, no children of my own. It seemed like the right thing to do." "Helping family is admirable," Teresa agreed, reaching across the table to cover Eleanor's hand with her own. "But there's a difference between helping and enabling. One builds people up, the other keeps them dependent." The observation struck Eleanor with unexpected force. Had her financial support actually prevented Marianne from developing resilience and self-sufficiency? Had her generosity toward Jessica and Michael deprived them of the opportunity to work for their achievements and truly value what they received? A chime from Eleanor's phone interrupted her thoughts. For a moment her heart lifted, perhaps one of them had finally reached out with a genuine apology. But when she checked the screen, it was a notification from Instagram. Against her better judgment, she opened it. Jessica had posted a photo from her wedding venue tour. The image showed her, Marianne, and the wedding planner, a sleek young woman with an asymmetrical haircut, standing in what appeared to be an ultramodern gallery space with floor-to-ceiling windows. The caption read, "Finalizing the perfect space for our contemporary celebration. So excited to create an event that represents the modern, forward-thinking couple we are. Hashtag no traditional wedding here, hashtag cutting edge, hashtag modern love." The post had already garnered dozens of likes and supportive comments from friends praising Jessica's bold vision and unique approach to her wedding. Several people commented on how the minimalist venue perfectly complemented her youthful energy and innovative spirit. Not a single comment mentioned Eleanor's absence from the planning committee. It was as if her 3 decades of event planning expertise that had made her one of Phoenix's most sought-after coordinators before her retirement, had been erased completely. Teresa, reading over her shoulder, let out a string of colorful Spanish phrases that needed no translation. "The absolute nerve of that girl. 30 years in the business, and she doesn't even consult you about venues?" Eleanor stared at the photo, studying the faces of people she thought she knew. Jessica looked radiant with excitement, Marianne projected the satisfied authority of someone orchestrating a perfect event, and the wedding planner, who couldn't be more than 30, exuded the confidence of youth untempered by experience. Look at that venue, Eleanor murmured. All hard surfaces and glass. The acoustics will be terrible for the ceremony. And those windows facing west, the sunset will blind half the guests and wash out all the photos. You should tell her that, Teresa suggested. She doesn't want my advice, Eleanor replied, setting down her phone. That's been made abundantly clear. No, what's been made clear is that your sister doesn't want you involved, Teresa corrected. Jessica might feel differently if she knew what she was giving up by excluding Phoenix's former premier event planner from her planning process. Eleanor considered this possibility. Jessica had seemed genuinely remorseful during their confrontation, even standing up to her mother to insist that Eleanor be invited to the wedding. Perhaps there was an opportunity here to rebuild their relationship on more honest terms. Maybe you're right, she conceded, picking up her phone again. I could reach out directly to Jessica, offer some gentle guidance about the venue. That's the Eleanor I know, Teresa said approvingly. Lead with your expertise, not your hurt feelings. Show her what she's missing. Eleanor composed a careful text message to her niece. The gallery looks beautiful, Jessica. If you're open to a professional observation, those west-facing windows might create challenges for your photographer. I'd be happy to discuss some solutions if you're interested. Love, Aunt Eleanor. She pressed send before she could reconsider, then set her phone aside, trying not to watch for an immediate response. Now, Teresa said, refilling their wine glasses, let's talk about what you're going to wear to this wedding. If they thought you were too old for their modern aesthetic, we need to make sure you show up looking so fabulous that every Instagram influencer in attendance will be begging for your style secrets. Eleanor laughed despite herself, the sound breaking through the tension that had gripped her since Marianne's dismissive text message the previous day. Are you suggesting I try to upstage the bride? That seems petty, even under these circumstances. Not upstage, Teresa clarified. Elevate. Show them that elegance transcends age. That wisdom and style aren't mutually exclusive. As they discussed potential outfits, Eleanor felt a subtle shift in her perspective. The hurt remained, but it was being channeled into something more productive, a determination to redefine her relationship with her family on her own terms, from a position of strength rather than need. Her phone pinged with a response from Jessica. Thanks for the tip, Aunt Eleanor. The planner didn't mention anything about the windows. Would you really be willing to help? Maybe we could meet for coffee tomorrow? Just you and me? The message carried a tentative olive branch, one that Eleanor was inclined to accept despite her lingering hurt. Coffee tomorrow sounds lovely, she replied. There's a new place on Camelback Road that has the most amazing pastries. 10 a.m.? Jessica's response was immediate. Perfect. See you then. And Aunt Eleanor, thank you. As Teresa prepared to leave that evening, promising to check in the following day, she paused at the door. Remember what you're worth, Eleanor. Not just in dollars, but in wisdom, in experience, in all you have to offer. Don't let them minimize that because of some misguided obsession with youth. Alone again, Eleanor settled into her favorite reading chair, Jessica's text message still open on her phone. The prospect of meeting her niece without Marianne's interfering presence offered a glimmer of hope for genuine reconciliation. Not a return to the previous dynamic, that was neither possible nor desirable, but perhaps the beginning of a new relationship built on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 as Eleanor finally closed her eyes, emotionally drained but cautiously optimistic about tomorrow's meeting. Outside, the desert night had settled over Phoenix, stars emerging in a clear sky that promised another beautiful autumn day. Morning arrived with the gentle golden light that made Arizona sunrises famous. Eleanor dressed with particular care. For her coffee meeting with Jessica, choosing a cashmere sweater in a soft teal that brought out the blue of her eyes, paired with tailored black pants and her favorite silver statement necklace, a piece she had commissioned from a local artist. To celebrate Maxwell Events' 20th anniversary. The coffee shop on Camelback Road was busy but not crowded when she arrived at 9:55, selecting a quiet table near the window that offered both privacy and a view of the mountain that gave the road its name. She ordered a cappuccino and waited, wondering if Jessica would actually show up or if this was another example of her family's casual disregard for commitments. At precisely 10 o'clock, Jessica walked through the door, looking younger and more vulnerable than she had during their confrontation. Her professional makeup was absent, her expression open and slightly anxious as she scanned the room. When she spotted Eleanor, a genuine smile lit her face. Aunt Eleanor, she said, approaching the table with quick steps. Thank you for meeting me. Thank you for suggesting it, Eleanor replied, gesturing to the chair across from her. I've ordered a cappuccino. What would you like? Once Jessica had settled with her oat milk latte, an awkward silence fell between them. Eleanor waited, letting her niece gather her thoughts rather than rushing to fill the void with pleasantries. I wanted to apologize, Jessica finally said, her eyes fixed on her cup. Properly apologize, without Mom present. The way you were. Excluded from the wedding planning, from the guest list, it was wrong. I should have stood up sooner. Eleanor studied her niece's face, looking for signs of the manipulation she had come to expect from Marianne. Finding none, she nodded slowly. Thank you, Jessica. That means a lot to me. It's just. Jessica hesitated, searching for words. Mom has always handled family matters, you know? She decides who's invited to what, who sits where, how everything should be done. I've never really questioned it. And now? Eleanor prompted gently. Now I'm starting to see how she's controlled the narrative, Jessica admitted. How she's positioned you as this separate entity from the rest of the family, despite everything you've done for us. That invoice was. She paused, swallowing hard. It was eye-opening. Eleanor took a sip of her cappuccino, considering her response. The invoice wasn't meant to demand repayment, Jessica. It was meant to make visible what had been conveniently ignored, that I've been deeply invested in this family's well-being, financially and emotionally, for decades. I know that now, Jessica said, meeting Eleanor's gaze directly for the first time. And I'm ashamed that it took something so dramatic for me to see it. The truth is, I need your help, Aunt Eleanor. Not your money this time, your expertise. My expertise? Eleanor raised an eyebrow, surprised by this turn in the conversation. Jessica nodded eagerly. The wedding planner Mom hired, Zoe, she's very trendy. All her ideas sound amazing in theory, but when I try to visualize them, they don't feel like me. They feel like someone else's wedding that I'm just attending. And what kind of wedding do you want? Eleanor asked, her professional interest piqued despite her determination to maintain emotional boundaries. Something that honors tradition while still feeling contemporary, Jessica replied, a note of passion entering her voice. Something elegant but not stuffy. Beautiful but not Instagram perfect at the expense of being comfortable and meaningful. Eleanor felt a small smile tugging at her lips. This was the Jessica she remembered, thoughtful, genuine, before Marianne's influence had steered her toward superficial values. That sounds lovely, she said sincerely. And achievable, with the right planning approach. Would you consider? Jessica hesitated, then continued in a rush. Would you consider being my unofficial consultant? I'd still work with Zoe, the contracts are signed, but I'd run everything by you first. Your professional opinion would be invaluable. The request represented everything Eleanor had wanted: recognition of her expertise, inclusion in the planning process, acknowledgement of her value beyond her checkbook. Yet she hesitated, wary of falling back into old patterns where her contributions were taken for granted. I'd be happy to advise you, she said carefully, with a few conditions. Anything, Jessica agreed quickly. First, this stays between us for now. I don't want to deal with your mother's reaction until we've established our own working relationship on this. Jessica nodded. Agreed. What else? Second, my advice is just that, advice. You make the final decisions based on what feels right for you and your fiancé, not what your mother or the trendy wedding planner thinks will look best on social media. Definitely, Jessica said firmly. This is my wedding. I wanted to reflect who we really are. And finally, Eleanor continued, I need you to understand that my relationship with your mother is complicated right now. My willingness to help you doesn't mean I'm ready to pretend everything is fine with her. Jessica reached across the table to squeeze Eleanor's hand. I understand. And I appreciate your honesty. The truth is, I've always admired how direct you are. It's refreshing compared to Mom's approach. The subtle criticism of Marianne wasn't lost on Eleanor, but she chose not to pursue it. Driving a wedge between mother and daughter wasn't her goal, regardless of how hurt she felt. Then I think we have an agreement, she said, returning the squeeze before withdrawing her hand. Now, tell me about this gallery venue and why you chose it. As Jessica launched into an explanation of the venue selection process, Eleanor listened. With both personal and professional interest. The venue had been entirely Zoe's suggestion, with Marianne's enthusiastic endorsement. Jessica had reservations about the space, concerns that aligned perfectly with the issues Eleanor had immediately identified in the Instagram photo. The acoustics are my biggest worry, Jessica confessed. It's so echoey. But Zoe says they can bring in sound equipment to manage it. At considerable expense, Eleanor noted. And still with mixed results in a space with that much glass and concrete. Their conversation flowed easily as they discussed alternatives, perhaps keeping the gallery for the reception but finding a more intimate space for the ceremony itself. Eleanor suggested several options, including a stunning courtyard at A historic hotel that offered the perfect blend of tradition and modernity that Jessica seemed to be seeking. 2 hours passed before either of them noticed the time. As they prepared to leave, Jessica hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been on her mind throughout their meeting. Aunt Eleanor, the invoice, is it really suspended? Or were you just saying that to make Mom back down? Eleanor considered her niece thoughtfully. The invoice exists, Jessica. Whether it ever comes due depends entirely on how our family relationship evolves from here. I'm not interested in collecting money, I'm interested in establishing respect as a non-negotiable component of our interactions going forward. Jessica nodded slowly. That seems fair. More than fair, actually. Life rarely gives us the opportunity to reset relationships once they've fallen into unhealthy patterns, Eleanor said, gathering her purse. We have that opportunity now. Let's make the most of it. As they parted outside the coffee shop, Jessica impulsively hugged her aunt, the first genuine embrace they'd shared in years. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. Eleanor returned the hug, allowing herself to hope that perhaps something valuable had emerged from the painful exclusion that had started this journey. Not a return to the status quo, but the beginning of something healthier, more balanced, and ultimately more satisfying for everyone involved. Driving home, Eleanor felt lighter than she had in days. The hurt of being dismissed as too old still lingered, but alongside it grew a new sense of purpose and agency. She was reclaiming her value in her family's eyes, not through financial support this time, but through the wisdom and expertise that only her years of experience could provide. The invoice that had seemed so confrontational now felt more like a turning point, the moment when Eleanor Maxwell had finally said enough to being taken for granted, setting in motion a transformation that might ultimately heal rather than harm her most important relationships. The conference room at Camelback Wedding Planners hummed with tension as Eleanor entered at precisely 1:58 p.m. She'd chosen her outfit with strategic precision, a dove-gray pantsuit that whispered quiet authority paired with a vibrant silk scarf in shades of turquoise and silver. The ensemble communicated exactly what she intended: I belong in this room, regardless of my age. Jessica had arranged this meeting after 3 weeks of clandestine planning sessions with Eleanor. Their coffee shop conversations had evolved into detailed strategy meetings, with Jessica gradually finding her voice and vision for a wedding that would honor both tradition and modernity. Now it was time to bring that vision to the professionals. And to Marianne, who still believed she was orchestrating every aspect of her daughter's special day. Zoe Prentice, the wedding planner, occupied the chair at the head of the polished mahogany table, her posture radiating the confidence of someone who believed she was about to inherit her birthright, complete control over a high-budget society wedding. She'd brought her assistant, a sharp-faced young woman who kept checking her tablet and making notes on wedding websites. Marianne sat beside Zoe, her expression carefully neutral but her designer handbag clutched tightly in her lap like armor. Jessica occupied the chair across from her mother, her newly discovered backbone evident in the way she sat straight and made deliberate eye contact with everyone in the room. Her fiancé, David, a thoughtful architect who had been largely sidelined in the planning process, had claimed the chair nearest the window, as far from the tension as possible while still technically being present. Thank you all for coming. Jessica began with newfound confidence. I've asked Aunt Eleanor to join us today because, as you know, she ran the most successful event planning company in Phoenix for 30 years before retiring. Her expertise will be invaluable as we finalize the wedding details. Eleanor noticed the quick glance exchanged between Marianne and Zoe, a silent communication that spoke volumes about their previous discussions regarding her exclusion. How lovely, Zoe said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Though, I should mention that wedding trends have evolved dramatically in recent years. What worked in the past might not align with our contemporary vision. That's exactly why I want Aunt Eleanor's input, Jessica replied smoothly. She has experience with both traditional elements that stand the test of time and the ability to identify which trends have staying power versus which will look dated in wedding photos 5 years from now. The subtle rebuke wasn't lost on anyone in the room. David's mouth quirked in a poorly concealed smile while Marianne's lips thinned to a tight line. Well, Zoe said, recovering quickly, let's review where we stand. We've secured the obsidian gallery for both ceremony and reception. The minimalist aesthetic provides the perfect backdrop for our color scheme of charcoal, white, and acid green. The Edison bulb installations will create the industrial chic atmosphere that's dominating Pinterest this season. Eleanor maintained a neutral expression despite inwardly wincing at the description. Industrial chic had been trending for 5 years already, hardly innovative, and the harsh lighting from Edison bulbs was notoriously unflattering in photographs, casting sallow shadows under eyes and emphasizing every line on guests' faces. Actually, Jessica interjected, I've been reconsidering the venue. The statement landed like a grenade in the center of the table. Marianne straightened in her chair while Zoe's assistant stopped typing mid-sentence. Reconsidering? Zoe echoed, her professional composure slipping momentarily. Jessica, we've already put down a non-refundable deposit. The Obsidian Gallery is booked solid for the next 18 months, we were lucky to secure it at all. I understand that, Jessica said, her voice steady. And I'm prepared to forfeit the deposit if necessary. But before we make that decision, I'd like us all to visit another venue I've been considering, the courtyard at the Hacienda del Sol. Eleanor suppressed a smile. The historic hotel had been her suggestion during their first coffee meeting. A stunning Spanish colonial property with a central courtyard featuring ancient olive trees, cascading bougainvillea, and the kind of natural acoustics that made sound equipment almost unnecessary. The setting offered a perfect blend of timeless elegance and distinctly southwestern character that would set Jessica's wedding apart from the cookie-cutter industrial venues currently saturating social media. The Hacienda? Marianne's voice carried a note of disdain. Isn't that a bit traditional? We're aiming for something fresh and modern, something that speaks to Jessica and David's generation. Actually, David spoke up for the first time, I love the Hacienda. The architecture has this amazing dialogue between historic elements and contemporary design principles. It's exactly the kind of thoughtful integration I try to achieve in my own work. His support shifted the energy in the room, creating a subtle alliance that hadn't existed before, Jessica, David, and Eleanor on one side, Marianne and Zoe on the other. I've arranged for us to tour the property tomorrow morning, Jessica continued, her confidence growing visibly with her fiancé's support. I think you'll all be surprised by how versatile the space is. Zoe, recognizing the potential loss of control, and possibly commission, quickly pivoted. I'm always open to exploring options that might better suit the couple's vision. The Hacienda certainly has character. We could potentially work with that, though it would require significant redesign of our current concept. Or, Eleanor suggested mildly, speaking for the first time, we could develop a concept that enhances the natural beauty of the space rather than trying to impose something artificial upon it. All eyes turned to her, and Eleanor felt a moment of déjà vu from her event planning days, the sensation of commanding a room with quiet expertise rather than flashy promises. Mrs. Maxwell, Zoe acknowledged with forced politeness, I understand you have considerable experience with traditional weddings. But modern couples are looking for something distinctive, something that stands out on social media and creates a unique experience for their guests. Every generation believes it invented uniqueness, Eleanor replied with a smile that managed to be both warm and slightly challenging. But what I've observed over 30 years in this business is that the most memorable events are those that feel authentic to the couple, not those chasing the latest trend on Pinterest. Jessica nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly what I've been trying to articulate. I want our wedding to feel like us, not like we're performing someone else's idea of what's current. Marianne shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Jessica, honey, I thought we agreed on the modern aesthetic. The Obsidian Gallery photographs beautifully, all your friends will be impressed by how cutting edge it is. That's just it, Mom, Jessica said gently. I don't want people to be impressed by how cutting edge our venue is. I want them to be moved by how meaningful our ceremony is. I want them to have fun at our reception, not just think it's Instagram worthy. The meeting continued with a detailed review of the current plans, with Eleanor offering measured insights that gently redirected without directly criticizing Zoe's work. She suggested acoustic musicians for the ceremony instead of the DJ Zoe had proposed, pointed out potential issues with the catering menu that might leave guests hungry, and recommended a subtle shift in the timeline to account for Arizona's spectacular sunset lighting. Throughout the discussion, Eleanor noticed Jessica growing more animated, more engaged with her own wedding planning than she had been when following Zoe and Marianne's lead. David, too, began contributing ideas, creating a genuine collaborative atmosphere that gradually marginalized the opposition. By the time the meeting concluded, it was clear that a fundamental shift had occurred. Jessica and David were taking ownership of their wedding, with Eleanor serving as a supportive guide rather than a controlling influence. Zoe, recognizing which way the wind was blowing, had begun aligning herself with the new direction, already speaking about how she could enhance the Hacienda's natural aesthetic with contemporary touches. Only Marianne remained visibly displeased, her smile tight and her eyes hard as they prepared to leave. Eleanor, she said sharply as the others gathered their belongings. A word, please. Jessica shot her aunt a concerned glance, but Eleanor nodded reassuringly. Go ahead with David and Ms. Prentice. I'll catch up. When they were alone in the conference room, Marianne turned to Eleanor with barely contained fury. What exactly do you think you're doing? Supporting my niece in planning a wedding that reflects who she is, not who you want her to be, Eleanor replied calmly. This is about the invoice, isn't it? You're using Jessica to get back at me for the wedding invitation situation. Eleanor studied her sister thoughtfully. Even now, Marianne couldn't bring herself to acknowledge the hurt she had caused or take responsibility for her actions. Everything was framed as someone else's agenda, someone else's manipulation. This may surprise you, Marianne, but not everything revolves around you, Eleanor said finally. Jessica asked for my help because she values my expertise. She wants a wedding that feels meaningful rather than trendy. And she's old enough to make those decisions for herself. You've always been jealous of my relationship with my children, Marianne accused, her voice rising slightly. Just because you never had kids of your own. Stop, Eleanor interrupted, her tone firm but not unkind. That narrative might have worked for you in the past, but it doesn't anymore. This isn't about jealousy. It's about respect, for Jessica's wishes, for David's input, and yes, for my experience and contribution to this family over 3 decades. Marianne's face flushed with the familiar mixture of defensiveness and entitlement that had characterized their interactions for years. You can't buy your way into being the mother of the bride, Eleanor. No matter how many checks you've written over the years. The comment was designed to wound, to reduce Eleanor's decades of generosity to mere transaction. In the past, it would have succeeded, sending Eleanor into a spiral of hurt and self-doubt. But something had shifted in her perspective since the day she'd received that dismissive text message about being too old for the wedding. I've never tried to be Jessica's mother, she replied evenly. I've been exactly what I am, her aunt who loves her and wants her to be happy. The difference now is that I'm no longer allowing that love to be exploited or my contributions to be taken for granted. So the invoice stands? Marianne demanded. You're still holding that financial threat over our heads? The invoice remains suspended, not cancelled, Eleanor clarified. How our relationship evolves will determine whether it ever comes due. But Marianne, I want you to understand something important. This was never about money. It was about recognizing patterns that have been harmful to all of us, including you. Harmful to me? Marianne scoffed. How exactly has having a wealthy sister willing to bail me out of every financial crisis been harmful to me? Because it's prevented you from developing resilience, Eleanor said gently. From experiencing the natural consequences of your choices and learning from them. From building the kind of independence that brings genuine confidence rather than defensive entitlement. Marianne stared at her sister as if seeing her clearly for the first time, not as the family ATM or the spinster aunt, but as someone with insight and wisdom worth considering. I don't need your amateur psychology, she said finally, but the words lacked their usual bite. Perhaps not, Eleanor conceded. But I think Jessica needs both of us to support her choices right now, rather than imposing our own visions on her wedding. Can we agree on that, at least? After a long moment, Marianne nodded reluctantly. Fine. But I still think the hacienda is too traditional. Then express that opinion tomorrow during the tour, Eleanor suggested. Just remember that ultimately, this is Jessica and David's day, not yours or mine. As they left the conference room, Eleanor felt a curious lightness in her step. The confrontation with Marianne had lacked the explosive drama she had anticipated, instead revealing the first hairline cracks in her sister's defensive armor. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was the beginning of a more honest dialogue than they had managed in years. Outside, Jessica waited anxiously by Eleanor's car. Everything okay? Mom looked upset. Your mother is adjusting to the idea that her vision for your wedding might not be the only valid one, Eleanor replied, keeping her tone neutral. Give her time. This transition isn't easy for her. Jessica's expression softened with understanding. She's always been so certain about what's best for everyone. It must be hard to realize that sometimes she's wrong. It's hard for all of us to face that truth, Eleanor acknowledged. Myself included. The following morning dawned clear and perfect, the kind of Arizona autumn day that made locals forget the summer's brutal heat and winter transplants feel smugly superior about their relocation choices. The Hacienda del Sol glowed in the morning light, its adobe walls the color of warm honey against the dramatic backdrop of the Catalina Mountains. The tour group had expanded overnight. In addition to Jessica, David, Marianne, Zoe, and Eleanor, they were now joined by Grace and Teresa, whom Eleanor had invited as both moral support and additional voices of reason. David's parents had also been included at Jessica's insistence, their first real involvement in the wedding planning process. As they moved through the property, the natural beauty of the setting worked its own magic. The courtyard, with its ancient olive trees and vibrant bougainvillea cascading over weathered adobe walls, created an atmosphere of timeless romance that needed little enhancement. The indoor reception space featured hand-hewn beams, wrought iron chandeliers, and expansive windows that framed the mountain views. The ceremony could take place here in the courtyard, Jessica explained, her face alight with excitement as she gestured to a natural alcove formed by flowering vines and graceful tree branches. Then cocktails on the terrace while the sun sets, followed by dinner and dancing in the main hall. Even Zoe seemed genuinely impressed, already sketching ideas in her notebook for how to accentuate the space's natural beauty with subtle lighting and strategic floral arrangements. "We could incorporate your original color scheme in a more organic way," she suggested. "Soften the acid green to sage, perhaps, with accents of silver and dove gray that would complement the setting rather than fight against it." David's parents, initially skeptical about changing venues so late in the planning process, were won over by their son's evident enthusiasm. "This feels right for you too," his mother observed, watching David and Jessica discuss possible table arrangements with the kind of genuine engagement that had been missing from previous planning sessions. Throughout the tour, Eleanor remained deliberately in the background, allowing Jessica to take the lead in presenting her vision. This wasn't about asserting Eleanor's influence or expertise, it was about supporting her niece in creating a celebration that truly reflected her values and relationship. Marianne, too, seemed to be observing more than directing for once, her expression thoughtful as she watched her daughter confidently negotiate with the venue coordinator about date availability and contract terms. When the group gathered on the terrace for refreshments after the tour, the shift in energy was palpable. What had begun as a contentious power struggle had evolved into a collaborative process, with everyone contributing ideas that built upon rather than undermined each other. "I think we can all agree this venue offers something special," Zoe concluded, her professional instincts overriding any personal disappointment about changing direction. "The Obsidian Gallery certainly has its merits, but the hacienda provides a more soulful backdrop for the kind of celebration Jessica and David seemed to be envisioning." David's father, a retired judge with a reputation for bluntness, raised his glass in a spontaneous toast. "To making wise choices," he said, his eyes meeting Eleanor's across the table with a warmth that suggested he understood more about the family dynamics than he let on. "And to having the courage to change course when necessary." The simple sentiment resonated throughout the group, carrying different meanings for each person present. For Jessica and David, it affirmed their decision to reclaim their wedding from external expectations. For Zoe, it represented professional flexibility in service of her client's true needs. For Marianne, perhaps, it offered a first glimpse of what letting go of control might feel like. For Eleanor, it was vindication of a different sort, not the vindictive triumph she had briefly imagined when sending that invoice, but the quieter satisfaction of having facilitated positive change through wisdom rather than financial leverage. As the group prepared to leave, Marianne approached Eleanor privately, her expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "The hacienda is lovely," she admitted reluctantly. "Jessica seems happy here." "She does," Eleanor agreed, choosing not to press her advantage. "I still think some of Zoe's original ideas could work in this setting," Marianne continued, unable to completely surrender her influence. "The Edison bulbs would look charming strung between those olive trees." Eleanor bit back her instinctive criticism of the harsh lighting those bulbs would create. This wasn't about winning every point, it was about establishing a healthier dynamic going forward. "That could be beautiful," she said instead. "Perhaps we could suggest a test setup to see how they photograph in this environment." Marianne looked startled by Eleanor's collaborative approach, then nodded slowly. "Yes, that makes sense. We should see it before committing." It was a small moment, but significant, possibly the first time in years that the sisters had engaged in genuine problem-solving rather than power struggles disguised as discussion. As Eleanor drove home from the hacienda, Grace in the passenger seat beside her, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction at the successful venue change, cautious optimism about the evolving family dynamics, and a lingering sadness for the years of connection lost to unhealthy patterns. "You did good today," Grace observed, watching her friend's profile. "You guided without controlling, influenced without imposing." "I had a good teacher," Eleanor replied with a small smile. 30 years of managing demanding clients and their anxious mothers prepared me well for navigating my own family drama." "It's not just professional skill," Grace insisted. "It's wisdom, the kind that only comes from living long enough to recognize what matters and what doesn't. That's the gift of being too old for their modern aesthetic." Eleanor laughed, the sound carrying the lightness of someone who had transformed an insult into something empowering. "Maybe that should be my toast at the reception. Here's to being too old to waste time on what doesn't matter." "I'd drink to that," Grace agreed. "Speaking of which, what are you going to wear to this wedding?" "If they thought you were Too old for their modern aesthetic before, we need to make sure you show up looking so spectacular that everyone under 40 will be taking notes. The question sparked a conversation that carried them all the way back to Phoenix, not about upstaging the bride or making a statement, but about expressing Eleanor's authentic self with the confidence that came from 6 decades of living on her own terms. The invoice that had started this journey remained figuratively suspended, neither forgotten nor enforced. Its true value had already been realized, not in dollars repaid, but in boundaries established, respect rekindled, and a family dynamic slowly shifting toward something healthier for everyone involved. For the first time since receiving that dismissive text message, Eleanor Maxwell felt fully herself again, not the excluded aunt or the family ATM, but a woman of substance whose worth transcended both her checkbook and her age. The wedding that had nearly erased her was now becoming the catalyst for her most authentic re-emergence into family life, on terms that honored rather than diminished her place in the circle of connection that mattered most. The Hacienda del Sol glowed like a jewel against the dusky October sky as Eleanor Maxwell stepped from her car, the soft evening breeze carrying the mingled scents of desert sage and flowering jasmine. 6 months had passed since that painful text message, 6 months of redefined boundaries, honest conversations, and the careful reconstruction of family relationships on healthier foundations. Tonight was Jessica and David's wedding rehearsal. Dinner, and Eleanor had arrived early at her own insistence. As the unofficial advisor who had helped shape the celebration, she wanted one final walkthrough before the festivities began, ensuring every detail honored the vision her niece had finally claimed as her own. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant updo, complementing the flowing teal dress that moved like water around her as she walked. At 63, Eleanor carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world, who had learned that her age was not a liability but a perspective to be valued. Mrs. Maxwell. The venue coordinator hurried across the courtyard to greet her. Everything is arranged just as you and the bride requested. Would you like to review the setup before the other guests arrive? Eleanor smiled, appreciating the professional courtesy that acknowledged her role without diminishing Jessica's authority as the bride. Yes, thank you. Let's start with the lighting in the reception area. They moved through the property together, Eleanor noting with satisfaction how the space had been transformed according to the vision she and Jessica had developed together over the past months. The Edison bulbs Marianne had insisted upon were there, but modified with soft glow filters that created a warm, flattering light rather than harsh shadows. The table settings balanced modern minimalism with touches of traditional Southwestern elegance, hand-painted ceramic chargers, artisanal silverware, and centerpieces that combined desert succulents with classic roses in a harmonious arrangement that spoke to both heritage and contemporary style. Each element represented a carefully negotiated compromise between competing visions: Zoe's trend-conscious approach, Marianne's desire for impressive opulence, and Jessica and David's preference for meaningful simplicity. What had begun as a battleground had evolved into a collaborative canvas where each contributor's strengths enhanced rather than undermined the others. It's perfect, Eleanor told the coordinator, her professional eye detecting no flaws in the execution. Exactly what Jessica envisioned. As she completed her inspection, Eleanor heard familiar voices approaching. Jessica and David arrived arm in arm, their faces alight with anticipation for the weekend ahead. Behind them came Marianne, accompanied by her third husband Gerald, a quiet financial advisor who had brought welcome stability to her life over the past decade. Aunt Eleanor. Jessica called, hurrying forward to embrace her. I should have known you'd be here early making sure everything's just right. Old habits, Eleanor replied with a smile. Once an event planner, always an event planner. David kissed Eleanor's cheek warmly. And thank goodness for that. This wedding would be an entirely different affair without your influence. The comment might have provoked tension in the past, but tonight Marianne merely nodded in agreement. Eleanor's expertise has been invaluable, she acknowledged, the words clearly still unfamiliar on her tongue but sincere nonetheless. Though I still think the place card should be calligraphy rather than that modern typeface. Eleanor and Jessica exchanged amused glances. Some battles weren't worth fighting, and Marianne's need to assert her opinion on minor details had become more endearing than irritating as the larger power struggles resolved. The typeface stays, Mom, Jessica said firmly but gently. It's more readable for Grandpa Dan's aging eyes, and it complements the invitation suite perfectly. Marianne sighed dramatically but didn't press the issue, a small victory in the ongoing campaign for healthy boundaries. As other family members and the wedding party began to arrive for the rehearsal, Eleanor found herself observing the gathering with a sense of peaceful detachment. Michael, her nephew, approached with his wife and teenage children, greeting her with genuine warmth rather than the distracted obligation of previous family events. Various cousins, aunts, and uncles, many of whom had benefited from Eleanor's financial generosity over the years, sought her out for conversation that felt more authentic than the superficial exchanges of the past. The subtle shift was evident throughout the evening. Where once Eleanor had been marginalized, the unmarried aunt whose primary value lay in her checkbook, she now occupied a central role in family conversations. People asked her opinion, listened to her stories, and engaged with her as a person of substance rather than a convenient resource. Grace arrived fashionably late, as was her custom, immediately joining Eleanor at her table. "Well," she murmured, surveying the scene. "How does it feel to be the family matriarch instead of the family ATM?" Eleanor laughed softly. "I'm hardly the matriarch. Aren't you, though?" Grace challenged. "Look at how everyone's orbiting around you tonight. That's influence, not just inclusion." Before Eleanor could respond, Teresa appeared with a glass of champagne for each of them. "To the woman who taught her entire family that respect isn't optional," she toasted quietly. "And who looks fabulous doing it." The three friends clinked glasses, their decades of shared history creating a circle of understanding that required few words. They had witnessed Eleanor's journey from successful businesswoman to taken-for-granted relative to this new incarnation, a woman who had reclaimed her power by simply refusing to accept disrespect any longer. As dinner concluded and the rehearsal itself began, Eleanor watched Jessica take command of the process with confidence and clarity. Gone was the uncertain young woman who had deferred to her mother's judgment and the wedding planner's trends. In her place stood a bride who knew exactly what she wanted and communicated it with both authority and grace. Eleanor felt a surge of pride that transcended their family connection. This transformation in Jessica represented something universal. The moment when a young woman fully claims her voice and vision, learning to balance respect for others with fidelity to her own truth. When the rehearsal ended, Jessica approached Eleanor while the others gathered their belongings. "Can we talk privately for a moment?" she asked, gesturing toward the terrace where they would have some privacy. "Of course," Eleanor replied, following her niece to a quiet corner overlooking the desert landscape, now silvered by moonlight. "I have something for you," Jessica said, reaching into her purse and withdrawing an envelope. "It's not much, considering everything you've done, but it felt important." Eleanor accepted the envelope with curiosity, opening it to find a check inside, a check for exactly $95,000, the amount she had invoiced for celebration expenses 6 months earlier. "Jessica," she began, already shaking her head. "This isn't necessary. The invoice was never really about, I know what it was about," Jessica interrupted gently. "It was about recognition. About making visible what had been conveniently ignored. About establishing that respect is non-negotiable in relationships that matter." Eleanor studied her niece's face in the moonlight, seeing wisdom beyond her years in her expression. "David and I discussed this at length," Jessica continued. "We've been saving for a down payment on a house, but this felt more important. Not as repayment for a debt, but as acknowledgement of a truth. You've given this family far more than money over the years, Aunt Eleanor. You've given us an example of integrity, generosity, and quiet strength that I'm only now beginning to fully appreciate." Tears threatened at the corners of Eleanor's eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to undermine this moment with emotional overflow. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept it," Jessica urged. "Not because you need it or even particularly want it, but because it represents something important, that I see you, I value you, and I'm committed to a relationship based on mutual respect rather than convenience." The simple truth of her niece's words resonated deeply. This wasn't about financial restitution, it was about restoration of something far more valuable, genuine connection based on recognition of each person's intrinsic worth. "I'll accept it," Eleanor said finally, "on one condition." "Name it," Jessica replied. "That you and David use it for your down payment after all." She held up a hand to forestall Jessica's protest. "Not as a gift from me, I've made that mistake too. Many times. But as an investment in our future relationship. A clean slate where neither of us is beholden to the other, where we can build something authentic without the shadows of obligation or resentment." Jessica considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "A partnership rather than a patronage. I think I understand." "Exactly," Eleanor confirmed, relieved that her niece grasped the subtle but crucial distinction. "The money was never the point. The relationship is." As they rejoined the others, Eleanor felt a sense of completion that had eluded her for months. The invoice that had begun as a desperate attempt to make her family see her value had evolved into something far more meaningful, a catalyst for genuine transformation in how they related to one another. The following evening, as sunset painted the Catalina mountains in hues of rose and gold, Eleanor stood in the hacienda's grand suite, helping Jessica with the final touches of her bridal ensemble. The wedding dress balanced tradition and modernity perfectly, a classic silhouette rendered in contemporary fabric, with subtle details that honored both Jessica's personality and her heritage. "You look beautiful," Eleanor said softly, adjusting the delicate veil that had been in their family for 3 generations. "Thanks to you," Jessica replied, meeting her aunt's eyes in the mirror. "Not just for the dress advice, but for everything. For showing me what it means to stand in your truth with grace. For demonstrating that boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary for healthy relationships." Before Eleanor could respond, there was a knock at the door. Marianne entered, already dabbing at her eyes despite her best efforts to maintain composure. "Oh, Jessica," she breathed, taking in her daughter's appearance. "You're absolutely stunning." The moment held potential for tension. Marianne had initially pushed for a very different style of gown, but instead, genuine admiration filled her expression as she approached her daughter. "Eleanor," she acknowledged with a nod that conveyed more respect than any words could have. "You were right about the dress. The simplicity is perfect for her." Coming from Marianne, this concession represented a seismic shift. Eleanor accepted it with a gracious smile, recognizing the effort it had taken her sister to yield this point publicly. "It's Jessica's vision that matters," she replied diplomatically. "I just helped her articulate it." The 3 women stood together in momentary silence, their reflections captured in the antique mirror, 3 generations of female experience, each with her own wisdom to contribute, now finding balance after years of imbalance. "Well," Marianne said finally, her practical nature reasserting itself. "The photographer wants some pre-ceremony shots in the courtyard. Eleanor, he specifically asked if you could join us for the family portraits." "Me?" Eleanor couldn't hide her surprise. Traditionally, she had been relegated to the extended family photos, an afterthought rather than a central figure. "Of course you," Marianne replied, a hint of her old impatience creeping into her tone. "You're Jessica's aunt. More importantly, you're—" She hesitated, seemingly searching for the right words. "You're essential to this family. It's taken me too long to acknowledge that." The admission, halting and imperfect though it was, represented more healing than Eleanor had dared to hope for when she'd sent that invoice 6 months ago. Not complete reconciliation, that would require more time and continued effort from both sisters, but a foundation upon which something healthier could be built. "Thank you, Marianne," she said simply, accepting the olive branch with the grace it deserved. As they made their way to the courtyard for photographs, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The painful exclusion that had triggered her invoice had been transformed into something unexpectedly positive, a catalyst for honest communication, redefined boundaries, and relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or entitlement. The ceremony itself was everything Jessica and David had envisioned, meaningful without being ponderous, personal without being self-indulgent, traditional enough to honor family heritage while contemporary enough to reflect their own values. As Eleanor watched her niece exchange vows beneath the ancient olive trees, surrounded by flowers and the golden light of an Arizona sunset, she felt a profound sense of rightness settle in her chest. This was what celebrations should be, authentic expressions of commitment witnessed by a community that truly supported the couple's journey. Not performances designed for social media, not status displays for the benefit of observers, but genuine ceremonies that marked important life transitions with appropriate reverence and joy. During the reception, Eleanor found herself approached by David's father, Judge Robert Harrison, a distinguished man in his 70s with observant eyes and a reputation for blunt honesty. "Mrs. Maxwell," he began, offering her a glass of champagne. "I've wanted to speak with you all evening." "Please, call me Eleanor," she replied, accepting the glass with a smile. "Eleanor, then." He settled into the chair beside her, his expression thoughtful. "I want you to know that I've been watching this family drama unfold with great interest. As a judge, I've spent decades observing human behavior, particularly how people respond when their sense of entitlement is challenged." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "What you did with that invoice," he continued, "was masterful. Not vengeful, as it might have appeared on the surface, but clarifying. You created a moment of necessary reckoning that this family needed." "That wasn't my conscious intention," Eleanor admitted. "I was hurt, angry even. I wanted them to see what they had taken for granted." "The best lessons often begin with honest emotion," the judge observed. "But they transform into something more valuable through reflection and wisdom. You could have used that invoice as a weapon, but instead, you used it as a mirror, forcing everyone to see patterns they'd been avoiding for years." Eleanor considered his assessment, finding truth in it despite her initial discomfort with being credited with such deliberate strategy. Perhaps wisdom is simply what happens when we process our hurt instead of being consumed by it. Indeed. Judge Harrison raised his glass in a subtle toast. To wisdom, then, earned through experience and impossible to rush, despite our culture's obsession with youth and immediacy. As they clinked glasses, Eleanor felt a connection with this perceptive stranger who had recognized something valuable in her approach to conflict, not the passive acceptance she had practiced for too many years, nor the bitter resentment that might have poisoned her relationships permanently, but a third path that demanded respect while leaving room for reconciliation. The evening progressed with the comfortable rhythm of a well-planned celebration. Eleanor danced with David's uncles, chatted with Jessica's college friends, and even shared a surprisingly cordial conversation with Zoe, the wedding planner, who had ultimately created a beautiful event by incorporating rather than resisting the family's collective wisdom. As midnight approached, Eleanor found herself at a table with Grace and Teresa, observing the festivities with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who had contributed significantly to their success. "Look at Marianne," Grace murmured, nodding toward Eleanor's sister, who was dancing with her husband, laughing with uncharacteristic abandon. "I haven't seen her this relaxed at a family event in years. When you stop trying to control everything, you can actually enjoy what's happening," Teresa observed with the directness that made her such a successful businesswoman. "A lesson your sister is finally beginning to learn." "We're all learning," Eleanor replied, watching Jessica and David surrounded by friends on the dance floor, their faces glowing with happiness. "That's the gift of this whole experience, I think. Everyone had to reevaluate patterns we'd fallen into without questioning." "Speaking of gifts," Teresa said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "I heard about Jessica's check. Are you really giving it back to them for a house down payment?" Eleanor nodded. It felt right. The money was never the point. "Of course. It wasn't," Grace agreed. "But there's poetry in using it to help them build a home, a physical foundation that mirrors the emotional one you've helped construct through this whole process." As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Eleanor found herself drawn to a quiet corner of the terrace, where the desert night spread before her in a tapestry of stars and shadows. The air had cooled with evening, but warmth lingered in the adobe walls surrounding her, radiating back the day's stored sunshine. Jessica appeared beside her, now changed from her wedding gown into a simple white dress for traveling. "Sneaking away from your admirers," she teased gently. "Just taking a moment to appreciate what we've created together," Eleanor replied, gesturing toward the courtyard where the last dancers were swaying to a slow ballad. "It's been perfect," Jessica said, leaning against the terrace railing. "Exactly what I wanted without knowing I wanted it." "That's the benefit of perspective," Eleanor told her. "Sometimes we need someone who can see beyond trends and expectations to help us identify what truly resonates." "Someone older and wiser?" Jessica suggested with a smile that held no trace of the dismissiveness that had characterized her mother's original text message. "Someone who values substance over surface," Eleanor corrected gently. "Age is just one path to that wisdom, not the only one." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the stars emerge more clearly as the reception lights dimmed. "I've been thinking," Jessica said finally, "about what you said regarding the check, that it represents an investment in our future relationship. I want you to know that I understand what you meant now. It's not about financial support or obligation. It's about mutual respect and genuine connection." Eleanor felt a profound sense of satisfaction hearing her niece articulate this understanding so clearly. This was the true victory, not the money returned or the wedding influenced, but the transformation in how they related to one another. "That's exactly right," she confirmed. "And it's something I had to learn too. For years, I used financial generosity as a substitute for establishing real boundaries. I thought if I kept giving, eventually I'd be truly valued. But real value isn't earned through endless giving," Jessica concluded. "It's recognized through mutual respect. Something this family is finally beginning to understand," Eleanor agreed. As David approached to claim his bride for their departure, Eleanor embraced her niece one final time. "Be happy," she whispered. "And remember that respect is never optional in relationships that matter." "I will," Jessica promised. "And Aunt Eleanor? Thank you for sending that invoice. It might have been the best gift our family ever received." The young couple departed amid sparklers and cheers, leaving Eleanor with a sense of completion that transcended the successful execution of a beautiful wedding. What had begun as a painful exclusion had evolved into something unexpectedly transformative, a catalyst for growth that had benefited everyone involved. As she gathered her belongings and prepared to leave, Marianne approached, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Walk out with me," she asked, gesturing toward the parking area. They moved together through the now quiet venue, their heels clicking softly on the ancient tile floor. "It was a beautiful wedding," Marianne said finally. "Better than anything I had originally envisioned." Jessica knew what she wanted, Eleanor replied. She just needed space and support to articulate it. Space I wasn't giving her, Marianne acknowledged with surprising candor. Just like I never gave you the respect you deserved. Eleanor glanced at her sister, caught off guard by this direct admission. We've all made mistakes in how we've treated each other. Yes, but yours were made out of love and generosity, Marianne countered. Mine came from insecurity and entitlement. There's a difference. They reached Eleanor's car, stopping beside. It as the valet brought Marianne's keys. I've been thinking about that invoice, Marianne continued. Not just the amount, which was shocking enough, but what it represented, years of contribution that I conveniently minimized or ignored. Because acknowledging it would have required me to see our relationship differently. And how do you see it now? Eleanor asked quietly. As a work in progress, Marianne admitted. But one worth the effort. You're not just my financially successful sister or Jessica's generous aunt. You're a woman of remarkable wisdom and strength, and this family is better because of your presence in it, not your checkbook. The acknowledgement, imperfect though it was, represented more healing than Eleanor had dared to hope for when she'd calculated those celebration expenses 6 months earlier. Thank you, Marianne, she said simply. That means more than you know. As Eleanor drove home through the desert night, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from exclusion to essential presence in her family's life. The invoice that had seemed so confrontational had ultimately become a bridge to understanding, forcing everyone involved to examine patterns that had been harmful to them all. The wedding that might have erased her had instead become the setting for her most authentic re-emergence into family life, not as the convenient ATM or the spinster aunt, but as a woman whose worth transcended both her checkbook and her age. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in maintaining these healthier boundaries in relationships, but tonight Eleanor Maxwell drove home with the peaceful certainty that she had finally achieved what money could never buy, genuine respect based on recognition of her intrinsic value rather than her financial resources. The family that had once been willing to exclude her for being too old had discovered, perhaps for the first time, the irreplaceable worth of wisdom earned through decades of living authentically and giving generously. And in that discovery lay the most valuable gift of all, relationships built on mutual respect rather than convenience or obligation. As the lights of Phoenix appeared on the horizon, Eleanor smiled to herself. The invoice had been paid in full, not in dollars but in something far more precious, truth, recognition, and the beginning of genuine connection that no amount of money could ever purchase. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.